And finally, in sad news, whistleblower, government researcher, and peace activist Daniel Ellsberg, most famous for leaking the Pentagon Papers' secret history of the Vietnam War in the summer of 1971, announced Thursday he had inoperable pancreatic cancer and has been given 3 to 6 months to live. That hasn't stopped the loquacious researcher who photocopied thousands of pages of secret government documents that showed the United States had lied to the American public about the objectives of the war. More than 58,000 U.S. troops died over the course of the decades-long war. Hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of Vietnamese also died. Ellsberg has also been a vociferous advocate of whistleblowers like imprisoned WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange. The News has conducted at least 7 interviews with Daniel Ellsberg since about 2018. In this interview, he discusses former President Richard Nixon and nuclear war. The doomsday clock stands at 2 minutes before midnight. This symbolic clock, maintained by the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientist, signifies the level of nuclear threat to humanity. It's the closest the clock has been to midnight since 1953, during the Cold War. Today, 9 countries possess more than 14,000 nuclear weapons. The United States and Russia hold the vast majority of these weapons and keep some 1,800 ready to launch within minutes. It's believed the use of only 100 of these weapons against cities could lead to global cooling, affecting agricultural production and food supply. A conference to build for a new Ban the Bomb movement is scheduled for Sunday, April 14th at the New Jersey Institute of Technology in Newark. It'll also be live streamed. The 2 keynote speakers are Daniel Ellsberg, the author best known for leaking the Pentagon Papers, and Robert J. Lifton, who has written about the psychological effects of looming nuclear doomsday. Daniel Ellsberg spoke with WBAI on Wednesday. He says the current strategy, called mutually assured destruction, or MAD, is an existential threat to all humanity.
Any deliberate attack like that against the other superpower would almost surely destroy nearly everyone on Earth. The price of achieving that peace, that degree of peace, in that fashion has been the continuous operation, first the build-up, the deployment, the production, the design, and the build-up of forces that were capable of destroying life on Earth. And second, having those on a kind of alert, a hair-trigger alert, that allows the possibility that it will go off by accident. In other words, we live, in effect, on a precipice, or you could think on the slopes of a volcano, or think of living in New Orleans, for example, where it was well known that a Category 3, 4, 5 hurricane, when if it ever occurred, which was likely eventually, would inundate New Orleans. So in any given year, so far so good. They lived from year to year, and then the hurricane came along. A hurricane like that, except vastly larger, 1,000, more than 1,000 times that, could happen accidentally either as a result of a false alarm of the kind I've described, or escalation from a limited war that got started. Nowadays, you could imagine Russians and the U.S. fighting over Ukraine, for example, or possibly the Baltic states, or conceivably in Syria. And any such conflict would have the capability of setting off these hair-trigger forces. So could we have had peace without the existence of systems like that that could destroy life on Earth? Virtually certainly, yes. There was no excuse.
You have worked with presidents. I mean, you worked with, as I remember him well, Richard Nixon. He was a president who would make anybody, chill anybody's blood, and he was definitely a real politics sort of guy, right?
Nixon
how's he different from Trump?
Yeah, he was not less racist than Trump, not less aggressive than Trump in many ways, but he kept it to himself. He kept it secret. He was good at keeping secrets and good at lying. And he convinced people that he had not, he concealed from them, to put it that way, that he had in fact made nuclear threats imminently to North Vietnam, and I think he was serious about that. That was not a bluff, and the fact was that there was a resistance to Vietnam at that time called the moratorium, where people left work in a weekday 2 million of them on October 15th, 1969, which was just weeks before his threats expired on North Vietnam. He planned to carry them out on November 3rd. Now, hardly anybody knew of that at the time. It was very secret. People didn't talk about it. So it was only years later we realized that those people marching in the streets had actually been preventing nuclear war. And that is the truth. To say that is to say, in my opinion, that Donald Trump doesn't make the world more dangerous. He makes the danger a little more blatant, not necessarily greater than before. The difference is that the kinds of things Nixon would say privately, although he was taping himself, but he would say privately to his associates that were very anti-Semitic, anti-black, very bigoted, but privately. And Trump says that same sort of thing openly and appears more impulsive openly. So people are more aware of the danger. I would say the danger isn't necessarily greater now than it's been at various times in the past, but it's continuing. It's not getting less, and that's basically intolerable. To be rebuilding these systems now is unforgivable at the cost of $1.7 trillion to rebuild them, and when in fact it would be worth money on that scale to get rid of most of them.
What did you think of your depiction in the movie about the Washington Post?
Well, I was played by a very good actor, Matthew Rhys, who happens to look quite a bit the way I did at the time, only better. So that's good. I can't ask for more. Some of the scenes involving me were, the one with me and McNamara, for example, were taken word for word from my book, Secrets, a memoir of Vietnam and the Pentagon Papers, where McNamara had just told me that the situation in Vietnam was much worse this year, 1966, than the year before. And then minutes later, literally, I was telling we were just landing, telling a press conference on the ground that we were making great progress in every dimension. I was rather shocked by that at the time, but that scene in the movie is very accurate.
What makes politicians lie like that when it really doesn't seem to be to their benefit or the country's benefit?
To keep his job under Johnson. He, by that time, understood that the war was thoroughly stalemated at best. That's what he said to me on the plane. He'd been saying that for roughly a year. But he wanted to be Secretary of Defense, in part, not entirely for selfish reasons. He was helping Johnson keep the Joint Chiefs from using nuclear weapons against Vietnam. Good. And he felt that he alone was the man to do that. But at the same time, he did like the power and the prestige and the influence of being Secretary of Defense. And if he'd said to Johnson what he said to me, President Johnson, or put it another way, if he'd said it publicly, he would have been fired. As he was, basically 1 year later, when he did say to Johnson privately that we should negotiate and get out. That was in 1967. Well, the war had 8 years to go. So I wish he had done that then. But frankly, very, very, very few officials do tell the truth, even to their bosses, certainly to the public, at the cost of their jobs. You just don't see that.
Johnson didn't want to lose the war, is that it?
He knew he couldn't win the war except for brief, intoxicated moments, you might say. But he didn't want to lose it. And McNamara did his job, kept him from losing it at the cost of 58,000 American lives and millions of Vietnamese.
Daniel Ellsberg is the author of numerous books. His most recent is The Doomsday Machine, Confessions of a Nuclear War Planner, recounting his days working on nuclear warfighting plans for the Pentagon. A conference to build a new Ban the Bomb movement is scheduled for Sunday, April 14th at the New Jersey Institute of Technology in Newark. It will also be live streamed.
Godspeed, Daniel Ellsberg. And that's the news for Friday morning, March 3rd, 2023. The news is produced by this reporter. You can always hear the news at paulderienzo.com. From New York City, I'm Paul DeRienzo. Thanks for listening.